3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about 2000s nostalgia. So just to begin, the 2000s were obviously an iconic era for kids around the world. It was a time where Pokemon cards would become rivaled by Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You had kids riding around suburbs on scooters. And instead of the PlayStation 1, we had the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, and the Wii. Additionally, kids were introduced to the next generation of handheld gaming devices like the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and the PlayStation Portable. And who could forget iconic games like Dance Dance Revolution and Guitar Hero or Call of Duty and Halo. In fact, I think many kids remember playing these games with their friends all the time, eventually then playing not just at each other's houses, but also online when you had the development of things like Xbox Live on the Xbox 360. And I think a lot of kids spent late nights staying up way past their bedtimes to play games like Halo 2 or Call of Duty World at War. And it was kind of a staple for a lot of kids around the country. Meanwhile, on television, iconic shows like The Fairly Odd Parents, George Lopez, My Wife and Kids, Yes Dear, The Mentalist, Breaking Bad, The Office, The Big Bang Theory, The Bernie Mac Show, American Idol, Even Stevens, The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, Drake and Josh, and 2.5 Men would be regularly featured on television screens across America, while in theaters people went to see Shrek, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, Harry Potter, Anchorman, Napoleon Dynamite, Elf, 8 Mile, Spider-Man, Lord of the Rings, Ice Age, Gladiator, King Kong, the James Bond films like Casino Royale, Avatar, and High School Musical. I think what was really interesting about some of these movies that had come out during this era, Spider-Man in particular, this was a time that I think really felt like the beginning of a huge trend towards superhero movies coming out regularly. Because the Spider-Man franchise was just so successful, and so many kids started to dress up as Spider-Man on Halloween. And now, of course, we have Spider-Man movie. We've had several different Spider-Man movies since then, but also just the number of superhero movies that are coming out. It seems like every month there's some new superhero movie. High School Musical, though, was another really, really popular thing. I remember in daycare, kids acting out High School Musical because it was just so famous at the time. And thinking of TV shows, who knew early on in the 2000s that The Office or The Big Bang Theory would just become such enormous shows. I remember watching them when they first came out, and people think it was funny and interesting, and its popularity would just skyrocket, where each show would have just so many seasons later on because they were so extremely successful, and I think really represent a kind of the last era of really powerful and popular sitcoms. Now thinking of the world of WWE, this is also something that I think continued to grow in popularity in the 2000s for kids across America. You had famous wrestlers like John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, CM Punk, Brock Lesnar, and my favorite wrestler, the Boogeyman. These would become famous wrestlers for kids. And obviously today now a lot of these wrestlers are kind of at the edge of nearing the end of their careers. I know John Cena in particular, this is kind of his last ride. But yes, incredibly famous people that really helped promote the wrestling world to kids across the country. In terms of technological developments, you saw a lot of technological change if you grew up in the 2000s. This is something that we really didn't predict at the time, that we were living in such a technologically changing era, but we were. Kids were ditching their CD players for iPods or MP3 players. And instead of VHS tapes, we now had DVDs. So whenever you're going to like Blockbuster or something to rent VHS tapes were now kind of in the back aisles that no one went to. DVDs were now the new thing that people were renting. And it was also the era of the flip phone. You know, how many kids remember getting their first cell phone and calling their friends on it? It was a big deal. And then finally also we had digital cameras all of a sudden. You no longer had to go and get your film developed at Walmart or something like that to see the pictures you took. Instead, you could just plug into a computer and upload them so that you could then put them on your social media pages, because this is the era of MySpace and Bebo, Facebook and Twitter. And also a time that I think we all miss, when social media was actually about keeping in touch with friends and family, instead of today being spammed by a billion ads and misinformation. And additionally, we had major websites pop up like Wikipedia and YouTube, of course. Now, in terms of the music scene, this was an era dominated by rap and hip-hop, as well as the alternative rock and hard rock. We had artists like Lil Jon, Gorillaz, 50 Cent, Nelly, T.I., Usher, Akon, Alicia Keys, Chris Brown, The Killers, The Strokes, Black Lab, The White Stripes, Franz Ferdinand, Disturbed, Breaking Benjamin, 3 Days Grace, Evanescence, Linkin Park, System of a Down, Shinedown, Seether, Fall Out Boy, and Panic at the Disco. And of course, some of the biggest pop icons in world history would emerge in this era. Beyonce and Taylor Swift, who remain incredibly popular still 2 decades later after they first began their careers. I mean, it is crazy to think about how I remember when Taylor Swift, for example, really started to emerge in popularity when I was in high school. And, hearing her music play in the background of gym class, for example. And now it's like, her popularity is so incredibly large that, she brings major economic boosts to any city she goes to now. So who could have thought that she would become such a huge superstar in the world of music? Now, as for fashion, this was a time where I feel like malls began to mimic high school fashion culture and stereotypes very well. And still to this day, it's fun to go to a mall just because it reminds me of my childhood. And it's just kind of funny because it has these like movie type stereotypes of high school dress culture. For emo kids, there's a store like Hot Topic. For preppy kids, you have Hollister. And for jocks, you have stores like Nike. But also for like people who have like this hip hop fashion style, where people wanted to get hats that they would then wear crooked or sideways a bit. You had stores like Lids that people would go to. So it was definitely, if you ever need nostalgia for the 2000s, just walk around these malls because these stores still exist today. And it's kind of a blast from the past a little bit. Now, finally, we have the world of sports. Obviously, the NBA was dominated by the Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. The Lakers would win 4 titles in this era. And soccer fans would then also see teams like France and Brazil win the World Cup, led by stars like Ronaldo and Zinedine Zidane. While Barcelona, led by Messi, and Real Madrid, led by Zinedine Zidane, would both win the Champions League twice. Also, Barcelona featured a player like Iniesta, and Real Madrid had Raul. In ice hockey, the Devils from New Jersey and the Detroit Red Wings won a pair of Stanley Cups, with the Devils being led by Martin Brodeur and Scott Stevens. And the Red Wings were just a franchise completely loaded with superstars throughout the 2000s, with Hall of Famers like Steve Yzerman, Sergei Fedorov, Nicholas Lidstrom, Dominik Hasek, Brett Hall, Igor Larionov, Luke Robitaille, and Chris Chelios. As for baseball fans, they would see the Yankees and Red Sox dominate the era, 2 teams that you either hate or love. And both teams would win a couple World Series championships, with the Yankees being led by Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, and CC Sabathia, while the Red Sox were being led by Pedro Martinez and David Ortiz. And finally, in the NFL, it was the era of Tom Brady and the Patriots, who would win 3 Super Bowl championships. So ultimately, I know someone who really grew up in the 2000s, it's definitely a decade that is incredibly iconic. And I think today, given how chaotic the world has become, I think when I thought of the future, I thought the future would be better. And unfortunately, it seems to be getting worse. So the nostalgia for the 2000s, objectively and historically, is very, very legit. I think a lot of people are nostalgia for the past just because it was their past and they grew up in it. But this day and age, we really are in kind of troubled times. So this nostalgia is very much real. And so it makes me think to be happy that I grew up when I did. 2000s were certainly not perfect, but it seems like the world has shifted in a direction where it's a little bit more dangerous than it once was. Technology continues to advance rapidly, but kind of in an unknown territory. We're not talking about the era of social media anymore. We're talking about the era of artificial intelligence, which can be an incredible tool, but like social media, as we saw with social media, social media has become pretty rotten over the last few years. And I'm hoping that artificial intelligence doesn't move the same way. And obviously the political situation around the world is quite unstable. There were certainly problems in the 2000s. But in America, it didn't feel like things were this as out of control as they have become. A lot of people talked about, George W. Bush, and were not very positive about Bush. And that's understandable given the consequences of the war on terror and the economic recession that we had as a result. But with the rise of authoritarianism, it now seems like, well, those were issues, but they didn't seem like they were hopeless issues. And with rising authoritarianism, things are making it feel more hopeless, unfortunately. But this is life. Things come and go, things improve, and things get worse. It's a bumpy ride. It's like a roller coaster. And us kids that grew up in the 2000s and remember what it was like need to also recognize that this is also our world to shape and to make an impact as best we can. Because our generation really isn't the leaders of the world yet, but it will be soon. And what we decide to do when that time comes will probably make or break our future. So with that, the 2000s, an iconic era that will be greatly missed, knowing that we grew up in a time that was pretty cool and hopeful. So with that, as always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.